Hi, Bumble. You having altar time? Yeah? She really likes being in the room when I'm doing anything with my altar or meditating or doing yoga or anything like that. Probably because I'm kind of in a still, kind of quiet kind of mood or something. Cats seem to like that. Hi everyone, so I know I've been doing a lot of videos recently where I'm not actually facing the camera, and I do apologise that I'm doing yet another one. I had great intentions to actually sit in front of the camera today and start getting used to making videos in my new living space, but I actually just wanted to show you this new altar space. This is going to seem a bit strange because I've recently showed you my new sacred space in the shed out in my parents' garden, which you know, that I'm lucky enough that I have that space to use while I'm staying here, and it's a really wonderful space and I'm still kind of getting used to using it and things like that. But for some reason I felt like I wanted an altar space in my bedroom as well, like something indoors that would be a little bit easier to just sort of sit myself down in front of whenever I have, you know, 5 minutes or first thing in the morning or last thing at night, because obviously the shed is wonderful. I love having, I need to stop calling it the shed, I need to come up with some sort of better name for it. It's really wonderful to have that space and I do really love it, but at the same time I have to get out the key for it and I have to go out in the garden and it's dark, there's no electricity out there, or there's no lighting anyway, and it's just a little bit difficult to kind of go out there. So I do, but at the same time I was realising that I was spending a little bit less time in front of an altar than I would be when, you know, my altar space is actually in my living space. I also realised that I actually wanted to do a little bit of separation between my devotional work and my more kind of self-developmental kind of work. And this is something that I was going to actually talk about in a video. I wrote about it a little bit in the most recent newsletter that I sent out. I was talking about some issues that I've been having recently with the concept of kind of self-analysis and self-scrutiny and self-development kind of as a whole. And I won't get into all that now because I will get back into that again, and if you missed the newsletter then I think if you subscribe you can actually find the archives, but if not, I am definitely going to talk about that either on the blog or here in a video again. But anyway, I've just been feeling kind of uncomfortable recently with the way that I've been going about my self-development and even things like magic and working with deities. And I think I've kind of touched on this before, that I was feeling a bit like the self-developmental aspects of my spirituality were kind of taking over everything else. That my spiritual practice became very, very self-oriented rather than being focused more on divinity or on the earth or just on anything outside of myself. And I basically have a bit of a problem with getting kind of obsessive about self-development and self-growth and just planning and organising and having schedules and having specific ways of living, specific ways of doing things, and trying to find the best way of being, the best way of living. And it's something that I've been gradually realising is really, really unhealthy for me in recent times, because it's one of those things that seems like a really good idea. It seems like it's really helpful and productive and that it's going to make me happier. Things like trying to figure out the best way to sleep, for example. Like trying to figure out if I should get up early in the morning or not, or if I should, you know, I experimented with taking naps and things like that. And it was always this very kind of almost kind of panicked attempt to make myself feel more alert and awake and happier. And the way that I have been going about those kinds of things, while a lot of good things have actually come out of the self-work that I have been doing over the past maybe year or more, a lot of the time that kind of obsessive thinking, it turns into kind of analysis paralysis. Like it turns into this really stress-inducing kind of thing, and it's just not, you know, it's not actually helpful at all. And I started to realize that I needed to stop doing that kind of thing. Like I'm a terribly compulsive Googler, and once you start doing that, it's, as anybody who has that kind of Googling, compulsive Googling habit knows, it's such a terrible rabbit hole. It's just an infinite rabbit hole. You just keep going and going, because every time you get some results up and you read a few blog posts, or you read a few like medical kind of websites and things like that, it kind of raises more questions and more questions, and it just becomes this sort of really unhelpful and unhealthy kind of compulsive, obsessive compulsive thing. Now obviously that's quite different, and for a long time I didn't realise that this really had anything much to do with my spirituality, because those kinds of aspects of self-development, personal kind of I suppose self-help in a way, it seems quite separated from anything that you'd be doing spiritually, like shadow work or magic in an attempt to, or even just aligning your energy, like working with the chakras and things like that. That seems to me to be quite a different thing, and I didn't have such an overtly negative kind of response to that kind of work. But I've just been feeling more and more recently like actually sometimes thinking a lot about that kind of stuff and focusing a lot on, you know, analysing myself, analysing my emotions, thinking about why I'm responding to a situation in a certain way. It kind of turns into that same kind of obsessive thing where I'm constantly striving for this kind of perfect version of me and my life. And the way that it kind of manifests itself with spirituality is this attempt to find the most true version of myself. And that's something that I've been kind of starting to release as a concept as well. Because in the spiritual community we talk a lot about different aspects of the self. We talk a lot about the unconscious, we talk about the deep self, we talk about the ego, the shadow. And I think all of those concepts are really useful, and I think they're particularly useful if you're coming at it from a place of being really shut down and closed off from actually paying attention to what's going on with you at all. I know a lot of people really hide themselves from what's going on with them emotionally, physically, you know, just in general. I know a lot of people just distract themselves from their problems, they distract themselves from, you know, their emotional concerns, and they're actually, you know, they kind of don't give themselves the space and the time to process their emotions and actually pay attention to what they're feeling at all. I actually was never like that at all. I was always a navel gazer. I was always kind of obsessively like self-analytical. And I've kind of been realising that it's very important when you're taking advice from people about doing self-analysis and doing more journaling and doing shadow work and generally just doing kind of self-work and inner work. I think it's very important to know where you're coming from with that, and to what level you're starting completely from scratch. Like, for what level are you really starting with? Do you already have a habit of compulsively analysing yourself and your emotions and things like that? And are you actually just going to end up playing into that kind of unhealthy habit if you start, you know, pressurising yourself to do more journaling and do more inner work and that kind of thing? Anyway, this is a really long-winded way to start explaining why I have created this second altar. Because having said all that and having aired some of my concerns about the self-help and self-developmental community and how that crosses over into the spiritual community, I definitely think that, I'm not saying that there's no worth in it. Obviously I think that there is. I love tarot, I love using crystals, I love doing shadow work, I love exploring the inner terrain, I love exploring the self. I think it's really important to be aligned with yourself, to be aware of what's going on within you emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually. And that's never going to change. But I think I got to a point where I realised that it couldn't be constant, and it shouldn't be constant, and that I can't be, I don't want my spiritual practice to become just one big attempted journey towards perfection, because that's not what I want it to be about. That's not what I think it should be about. And there, at the end of the day, there is no, I hate to break it to you, there is no perfect version of you. It's an illusion. It's a myth, and it's a very hard, I think it's a very hard balance to find, a very hard line to kind of toe between doing the amount of self-analysis and self-work that is really, really healthy and really helpful. And I have seen people blossom through, you know, going to counselling and journaling and doing inner work and just paying attention to their own behaviour, paying attention to their patterns of behaviour, paying attention to their patterns of their emotions, and making conscious choices to change that up, to think differently, to choose to be positive and optimistic, as you know, rather than being negative and pessimistic. I have seen people transform, and people really close to me transform through doing those things. But it's a very slippery slope. It's a very, very slippery slope from you utilising all of those tools on a kind of, you know, in a healthy way and on a healthy level, to giving yourself permission to essentially berate yourself. And sometimes it doesn't feel like you're berating yourself, because it seems like a useful kind of dialogue, that you've got some sort of dialogue going on in your head, and you're working through it maybe magically, and you're trying to work with crystals, and you're journaling, and you're doing all these different things to work through whatever this problem is, and you kind of think, well, this is helpful, this is useful, this is something I need to work through, that I need to go through. But I realised that I get to a point where I'm just hindering myself. I'm allowing myself to just stay on that obsessive thought cycle, constantly worrying and just making the whole thing seem like a much bigger problem than it actually is, by constantly worrying about it and going over it in my head. And if I tell myself that my spiritual practice is basically one big kind of self-developmental exercise, or if I allow myself to let it be like that, that just kind of gives me even more permission to just continuously be on that kind of cycle, that constant, and it is a form of berating yourself, constantly asking yourself, you know, why am I like that? Why did I do that? Why did I feel that way? There's a time and a place for that, but you really have to draw the line somewhere. You really have to stop and just let yourself experience life and step outside of yourself, and, you know, honestly, stop taking yourself so damn seriously, because there's a lot more to life than what's going on in your emotional self. There is more to life, trust me. And the more you engage with everything else, the more you let that in, the more you focus your mind, the more you become mindful and really experience life while you're doing it, rather than going around in this haze of constantly trying to figure yourself out. The more that the problems, I think, will kind of start to drop away, and things that you thought, like I say, things that you thought were a huge big issue and were very complicated and confusing and horrible and whatever, that you needed to sort out with yourself, sometimes after a while of just allowing yourself to just live and not think about it and not try to fix it, sometimes you realise that it wasn't such a big problem after all. So basically I decided I don't want to stop doing the little practices of self-development and self-work, and I want to come up with a better word for it, actually. Well-being, maybe. Practices of well-being might be a more positive way for me to think about it. You know, I love meditating. That's always going to be. Now, meditation can be a devotional kind of practice as well, and for me it's kind of both. And I did talk about this a few weeks or months ago, about separating that self-development or well-being, those practices of well-being, from the devotion, but I think it hadn't quite sunk in to what level I had to do that, and how much the two things had really become kind of intertwined for me. And like, I'm not saying that everyone should do this. I'm not saying that you need to go away and kind of segregate your practices of well-being from your practices of devotion, because you mightn't have those kind of tendencies that I have, and it might be a wonderful thing for you to do. But anyway, I wanted to have a space basically where I could come and sit and align myself in the morning, say, you know, just kind of set up my intentions for the day, and kind of set my energy for the day, draw tarot cards, do tarot readings for myself, that kind of thing. within a kind of spiritual context and within the context of my devotional work, but as a separate kind of thing, so that my mind kind of says, right, this is the space for this. It's positive, it's airy, it's light. I come here, I do the work, I go away again. And that then my sacred space out in the garden, the little shed where my kind of main altar is, that is going to become all about devotion. And I'm thinking that I'm going to really start working with deity and with the Morrigan and Odin and whoever else, whichever else deities I want to work with, that's going to become a slightly different thing for me, and that I'm going to be when I do path workings with them and things like that, that I'm not going to be like trying to use those experiences to sort out issues that I'm having in myself. That I want it to be more about devotion and looking outward, and maybe even receiving messages about cosmos, about the divine, about much bigger and broader things, about life and love and kind of philosophical things and stuff like that, rather than being just trying to interpret everything in the context of the nitty-gritty details of my life, which in the grand scheme of things is really tiny. So that's what this space is for. This space is for coming here in the morning, and the space in front of you now, coming here in the morning, well, you know, my bed is literally just right here to the left, and having a place to just sit down and kind of set things up for the day. So yeah, and then ritual will happen out in that shed in the garden, all of that kind of thing. For the moment, I said that I was going to start doing rituals for self-development, like writing rituals in order to kind of use magic or ritual in a way to, I suppose, effect change in myself and reflect transformation that's going on within me and that kind of thing. Right now, I think I'm not going to do that. I feel like right now, I feel like I've been doing that for years now and nothing very good has come of it. It kind of feels satisfying at the time, but it usually hasn't helped me, and it often just seems to kind of fall flat. And I think in retrospect, it's because I'm just trying to force things. That it's because I have control issues. It's not a great thing for me to be trying to control my own evolution, and I think that's something I do want to take a break from for the moment. But these small acts of drawing a tarot card in the morning and just sitting with a crystal, whichever crystal I feel that I need at the time, it's a lot more spontaneous. It's more of a surrender. It's more of just an acceptance of what is right now. You know, there can be a little bit of direction. I could decide to draw a tarot card that I want to aim towards. I could, you know, if I want to try to feel a certain way that day or that week, I could choose a crystal to help me align myself with that kind of feeling. But mostly I want this space to be very much about being aware and present and just surrendering to where I'm at, while at the same time, like I say, kind of being able to choose how I want to respond to the world that day, kind of saying, okay, I'm ready to take the world as it is and take myself as I am and accept all of that. But this is just how I want to face the day. I just want to settle myself and get myself into a positive kind of space before I start living. So as you can see, my Buddha has made his way inside. Because he wasn't actually on my altar space in the shed anymore, I just thought, you know, he's perfect in here. This is a much better space for him than out on my kind of devotional altar, because the Buddha to me is all about well-being and compassion and kind of bettering yourself. And he's just a wonderful symbol for all of that, because he's like the opposite of berating and trying to force yourself into being a better version of yourself and that kind of thing. So I have him at the back, and he's got a very handy little spot where I can put tarot cards, which I'm really loving. And then I have, you can see the stone on the left hand side is my the stone that my dad gave me at Bealtaine. Then the right hand side, a piece of agate that I'm desperately trying to get off the horrible stand, but I haven't had any luck yet. That's from Brittany, also a present from my parents actually. The two bowls on either side, I was thinking they might be offering bowls for the Morrigan and Odin. I'm actually thinking now that they mightn't be that, because like I say, I want to separate the devotion from the well-being for now in my life. So I might use them for any other kinds of things, like if I want to write something down and put them in there, haven't fully decided, or I might just put candles in them. Then of course there's just, oh yeah, there's a shell, which I think is going to be a bit of another offering dish. At the moment it has some crystals in there and a magpie feather over the top. Then there's my main candle in the center. I have a set of prayer beads, a really simple set of prayer beads here as well, which I might or might not use. And then at the front I have all of my big crystals. This was a big decision. I had brought them out and I had them on the kind of top part of my altar, which is sort of for cosmos, for goddess or god. And I found that when I was out there meditating and doing my devotional work, I do devotional work now in the evenings for primarily the Morrigan and also Odin. So again, that'll be happening out in my shed, sacred space. But I found that when I was sitting there, they were a little bit high up for me to reach, because that shelf is actually quite far up off the ground, and I just wasn't reaching for them anymore. And that kind of bothered me. So when I realised that I wanted a sacred space in here, I thought, perfect, this is exactly where they need to be. This is where I will actually use them. So I still have crystals outside that are kind of devoted to the Morrigan and to Odin, but these ones here are the primary ones that I use for kind of chakra work. But I realised actually that what they really are a collection of the elements. And I can't believe it took me this long to realise this, guys, that the set that I've been kind of forming, because once I got the blue calcite was the last of the kind of crystals. I don't know, after I bought that blue calcite and the labradorite for Odin, I kind of felt done with crystals for right now. And I was thinking, it's almost a chakra set, but you know, I'm missing something for the crown chakra, I'm missing something for the sacral chakra, not the sacral chakra, sorry, the solar plexus. And you know, do I need, and I didn't really feel the need to get any big stones for those chakras. And then I realised, yeah, it's elemental. Which is great, which is really nice. I don't know, and I kind of had thought that before, but for some reason it had set my mind again, I don't know. So we have smoky quartz for earth, the rose quartz for water, which might seem like a strange choice, but I'll talk about that again in a sec. Then we have the fluorite for spirit, the carnelian for fire, and the blue calcite for air. The reason I ended up with these associations is because I was originally associating them with the chakras, and the blue calcite obviously was for the throat chakra, which is very, very associated with air for me. And then the rose quartz, very much a heart chakra stone, and the heart chakra I personally associate with water. But I realised as well that, see, I don't work a lot with the elements as elements, because I don't really see cosmos or earth as being split up into elements, and if I do, it's not 4 or 5, it's 3, and then the sun. Like, I don't really see fire as an element. Like, I can see kind of water, earth, and kind of wind or air. That makes sense to me, but the fourth element of fire just never really sat right with me. Like, obviously the sun just almost seems too important, and it's separate, it's not actually on the earth. And then the element of spirit, for me again, is not something, I don't necessarily see spirit as being something separate from all other types of matter. So I think that's why I was hesitant to think of these crystals as being to do with the elements. But then I realised they're not just about the elements, they're also about the suits of tarot. So the fluorite as spirit, for me, represents the major arcana, and then the other 4 correspond with the other 4 suits of the minor arcana. And this just suddenly makes so much more sense to me, because blue calcite and swords, like, that just makes so much sense to me. And the rose quartz and cups, that just makes perfect sense to me too. And yeah, and the fluorite and the major arcana, that just sat so well with me, because the major arcana is just so archetypal and so spiritual, so exciting, and just kind of reminds me of my relationship with the gods and things like that, and my fluorite is really, really important to me. So that's a very roundabout way of saying that I've come up with a new method of choosing a crystal in the morning that I want to meditate with. And sometimes I'll just do this spontaneously, but I like to have kind of, you know, a quick and easy way of deciding which I want to use. So what I've been doing is actually I draw a tarot card, and depending on what suit I draw it from, or you know, if it's from the major arcana, I pick up the corresponding crystal then and meditate with that crystal, if you see what I mean. So today I drew the King of Wands, sorry, the Knight of Wands, what am I saying? And I meditated with my carnelian. That's going to be my practice for the foreseeable future. This video has actually turned into a much more complicated thing than I was expecting it to, and I probably should have sat in front of the camera to make it a little bit more interesting for you guys, so sorry about that. But yeah, that's a very long-winded way of saying that my daily practice is definitely changing up a bit, and I'm going to be doing that in the mornings, probably with a bit of meditation. I'm getting a little bit less strict with myself about meditation. I do want to maybe find another part of the day, maybe when it suits me, to do a more extensive meditation, but I haven't fully decided. And then in the evenings I'm going to be doing devotional work for the Morrigan and Odin, and just general kind of prayer, as opposed to this kind of work which I see now as being kind of different. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there because I think this video has turned out to be an awful lot longer than I was expecting. Kitty is here meowing at me, she wants something, so yeah, I'll leave it there, and I promise that you will see my face next time.